Mr. Blumenthal, Mr. Blunt. Mr. Booker. Mr. Bozeman.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm sure Mike Greyhound is also a great thing.
Mrs. Boxer. Mr. Brown.
Thank you. The small guys showed up. Team effort. Thank you, sir. Thanks for working that out.
Mr. Brown. Mr. Burr.
Maybe we ought to hot the fence to some of their guys who have from 9:15 to like 6, like 7 a.m. or like 6 a.m.
No. Ms. Cantwell, Mr. Cardin, Mr. Carper, Mr. Casey, Mr. Chambliss. Mr. Coates, Mr. Coburn, Mr. Cochran, Ms. Collins, Mr. Coons, Mr. Corker, Mr. Cornyn, Mr. Crapo, Mr. Cruz, Mr. Donnelly, Mr. Durbin, Mr. Enzi, Mrs. Feinstein, Mrs. Fisher, Mr. Flake, Mr. Franken, Mrs. Gillibrand, Mr. Graham, Mr. Grassley, Mrs. Hagan, Mr. Harkin, Mr. Hatch, Mr. Heinrich, Ms. Heitkamp, Mr. Heller, Ms. Hirono, Mr. Hoven, Mr. Inhofe, Mr. Isaacson, Mr. Johans, Mr. Johnson of Wisconsin, Mr. Johnson of South Dakota, Mr. Kane, Mr. King, Mr. Kirk, Ms. Klobuchar, Ms. Landrieu, Mr. Leahy, Mr. Lee.
You know, the good thing is I haven't seen him quite this year. I hope next year's the same.
Mr. Levin, Mr. Manchin, Mr. Markey, Mr. McCain, Mrs. McCaskill, Mr. McConnell, Mr. Menendez, Mr. Merkley, Ms. Mikulski, Mr. Moran, Ms. Murkowski, Mr. Murphy, Mrs. Murray, Mr. Nelson, Mr. Paul, Mr. Portman, Mr. Pryor, Mr. Reed of Rhode Island, Mr. Reed of Nevada, Mr. Risch, Mr. Roberts, Mr. Rockefeller, Mr. Rubio, Mr. Sanders, Mr. Schatz, Mr. Schumer, Mr. Scott, Mr. Sessions, Mrs. Shaheen, Mr. Shelby, Ms. Stabenow, Mr. Tester, Mr. Thune, Mr. Toomey, Mr. Udall of Colorado, Mr. Udall of New Mexico, Mr. Vitter, Mr. Warner, Ms. Warren, Mr. Whitehouse, Mr. Wicker, Mr. Wyden. Senators voting in the affirmative: Baldwin, Baucus, Begich, Bennett, Blumenthal, Booker, Boxer, Brown, Cantwell, Cardin, Carper, Casey, Collins, Donnelly, Durbin, Feinstein, Franken, Gillibrand, Hagan, Harkin, Hatch, Heinrich, Heitkamp, Hirono, Johnson of South Dakota, Kane, King, Klobuchar, Landrieu, Leahy, Levin, Manchin, Markey, McCaskill, Menendez, Merkley, Mikulski, Murkowski, Murphy, Murray, Nelson, Pryor, Reed of Rhode Island, Reed of Nevada, Rockefeller, Sanders, Schatz, Schumer, Shaheen, Stabenow, Tester, Udall of Colorado, Udall of New Mexico, Warner, Warren, Whitehouse, Wyden.
No.
Yeah, you get a good night's sleep. That's it.
Senators voting in the negative: Alexander, Ayotte, Barrasso, Blunt, Bozeman, Burr, Coates, Coburn, Cochran, Cornyn, Crapo, Cruz, Enzi, Fisher, Flake, Grassley, Heller, Hoven, Isaacson, Johans, Johnson of Wisconsin, Lee, McCain, McConnell, Moran, Hall, Portman, Risch, Roberts, Rubio, Scott, Sessions, Shelby, Thune, Toomey, Vitter, Wicker. Mr. Coons. Mr. Coons, aye. Mr. Corker. Mr. Corker, no. Mr. Chambliss. Mr. Chambliss, no.
Any senator wishing to vote or change their vote? Seeing and hearing none. Motion. On this vote, the yeas are 58, the nays are 39. The motion is agreed to. The clerk will report the nomination.
Nomination, the judiciary, Susan P. Waters of Montana to be United States District Judge for the District of Montana.
Pursuant to the provisions of S. Resolution 15 of the 113th Congress, there will be now be up to 2 hours of full-disclosure consideration of the nomination equally divided in the usual form.
Mr. President,
Majority Leader.
if I yield back 1 hour of the majority's time, what time would the next vote occur?
9:15
I yield
p.m.
back that 1 hour.
Time is yielded back.
President.
Senator Furmano. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. Senator from Mississippi. I was looking
Thank you.
elsewhere, sorry.
I was a bit perplexed there for a moment.
You moved.
It was not the first time, Mr. President. Mr. President, we are now on calendar number 349, message 462. Susan P. Waters of Montana to be United States District Judge for the District of Montana. I note on the executive calendar, this nomination came before the Senate from the committee on September 19. It's my understanding that this nominee was cleared by our side of the aisle and could have been brought up on any Monday afternoon by a voice vote. I think members might be wondering, and certainly people within the sound of my voice tonight might be wondering, why we are spending time tonight in a protracted debate on 3 district court nominees, Landia B. McCafferty of New Hampshire, Brian Morris of Montana, and now Susan Waters of Montana, to be confirmed when there has never been a district court judge in the history of our republic prevented from serving because of a filibuster. To me, we've gotten to this point, Mr. President, because of the heavy-handed overreach of the majority in trampling on the rights of folks on our side of the aisle who find ourselves temporarily, I hope, in the minority. That has a way of changing from time to time, but it's the sort of overreach that I'm reminded of from 2009, when a supermajority in both houses rammed through Obamacare and caused all of the grief that we currently are facing and that real live Americans are having with the so-called Affordable Health Care Act. You know, it actually might be, in one way, beneficial that we're spending this time on something that could have been done so quickly, because it gives us an opportunity to point out that we should be, right now, at this moment, working on the National Defense Reauthorization Act and also on the budget. Two matters that are pending that really must be addressed by this Senate before we can go home and take a day or two with our constituents and loved ones for the Christmas holiday. But it gives me an opportunity, as the budget comes over tonight now, Mr. President, from the House of Representatives, to point out one of the most onerous provisions in the budget, which is just passed with sweeping bipartisan support in the House of Representatives. I will stand before this body tonight and say that I cannot vote and will not vote for this budget, and I hope that even yet members of the Congress and the American public will listen to the broken promise that is contained in this budget that will be coming forward. And then we'll perhaps get back to the nomination in a moment. But we should know two things about this budget. It asks an additional contribution for pensions for federal employees, but it doesn't do it to current federal employees. Because if you enter the federal service after the beginning of the year, you pay an additional amount that is withheld from your paycheck for your pension. Now, that's a hard thing to do. It's distasteful to do, but at least it's fair to the people who joined the federal service under one set of rules. On the other hand, the budget that comes over to us from the House of Representatives, and that I will oppose when it eventually does come up for a vote, hopefully next week, does to retired servicemen what we were persuaded not to do on federal employees. It breaks a promise to retired service people who've already served their time. And it does this, Mr. President. It says to every retired service member under the age of 62, you're not going to get your COLA anymore. Each year until you get to be 62, you're going to get your COLA less 1%. And I can tell you that this is not a matter of nickels and dimes to the people who have stepped forward, joined the military, volunteered for a career in the military, done their 20, and now are going to be told if this resolution, if this budget passes next week, we're sorry. We're changing the rules way after the game has begun. I want to submit at this point, Mr. President, for the record, a letter to me from Vice Admiral Norb Ryan, United States Navy retired, President of the Military Officers Association of America. May I submit that for the record at this point, Mr.
Without objection.
And let me just point out what the retired Vice Admiral says. On behalf of the 380,000 members of the Military Officers Association of America. I am writing to express our strong opposition to the proposal within the Bipartisan Budget Act of 2013, which penalizes future uniformed service retirees and current retirees under the age of 62. Even though the budget deal would help ease the harmful effects of sequestration for 2 years for the Department of Defense, something we support, doing so on the backs of service members who serve our nation for over 20 years is just shameful. And I would interject at this point, Mr. President, I have to agree with that statement. The Vice Admiral goes on to say, reducing working age retiree annual cost of living adjustment by 1% until they reach the age of 62 is simply a tax. Service members who retire at the 20-year point would feel the full negative financial effects of the proposal by reducing their retired pay by nearly 20% by the time they reach the age of 62. And this is the pertinent part, Mr. President, of the letter which I am inserting to the record at this point. For example, and my colleagues should hear me on this, Mr. President, an Army Sergeant First Class E7 retiring this year with 20 years of service would see an average loss of over $3,700 per year by the time he or she reaches age 62, a cumulative loss of nearly $83,000. That's what this bipartisan budget resolution does to the retired military enlisted people who have volunteered to serve our country for 20 years and who joined under one set of rules. $83,000 lifetime taken from this retired E7. For a lieutenant colonel, 05, the average annual loss would be over $6,200 annually, a cumulative loss of over $124,000. This, I'll yield on this absolutely to my friend from
Senator from Georgia.
I know the senator from Mississippi was on active duty in the Air Force for several years and has stayed in contact with many members of the military, not just as a result of your service on the Armed Services Committee, but just because you're very keenly interested in the welfare of the men and women in our military. And if I'm hearing the senator from Mississippi correctly on this particular issue, what you're saying is that an E7 who served in Iraq, served in Afghanistan, conceivably served multiple tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, maybe even was awarded major meritorious recognition, is now going to have the promise that was made to him about his retirement reduced retroactively? Do I understand that correct?
Rules, if this budget passes and is signed into law by President Obama, will be changed on this individual retroactively. And the result will be, instead of the retirement pay he signed up for and agreed to under the law when he did his duty, an $83,000 loss lifetime.
Mr. President, again, if I can inquire of the senator, you, as I say, have been very close to any number of military personnel through the years that you have served in this body, as well as your service in the Mississippi legislature, and just by virtue of the fact of practicing law in Tupelo, Mississippi. What is the opinion of the senator from Mississippi as to the morale influence that a provision like this is going to have on our men and women in the military, but not just those that are retired, but active duty military today?
You know, I can only imagine that it's a severe blow to morale, and also it has to make people who are willing to step forward and risk their lives, be separated from months and years from their loved ones, has to make them wonder, what else is being promised to me that's going to be taken away?
And you mentioned also the reduction in federal retirement pay. which we've got to figure out ways to save money. We all know and understand that. And there is a change in the pension for federal retirees, but it's all prospective.
Right. We don't do
Going
anything.
forward.
We don't do anything to any other federal employees retroactively. Only the military in this budget. I can't imagine how the public could think that is fair.
Well, I'm very sympathetic, even though I never served on active duty in the military as you did. But this is very, very strange, and it's very difficult to understand why we would penalize the men and women who wear the who have worn or do wear the uniform of the United States versus a very similar provision for the men and women who serve the government of the United States in a very honorable way, but we're treating them very, very differently, and it seems like almost discriminatorily.
I tell you who else believes it's discriminatory. I have a list of members of the military coalition listed in a letter to the Honorable Harry Reid and the Honorable Mitch McConnell dated December 11, 2013. Mr. President, I would ask at this point that this letter be inserted into the record.
Without objection.
And I would simply say in answer to the distinguished gentleman from Georgia, here are the groups that are expressing outrage, dismay, and strong opposition to this provision. The Air Force Sergeants Association, Air Force Women Officers Associated, AMVETS, AMSUS, Association of the United States Navy, Chief Warrant Officer and Warrant Officer Association, U.S. Coast Guard, Commissioned Officers Association of the U.S. Public Health Service, Incorporated, Enlisted Association of the National Guard of the United States, Fleet Reserve Association, Gold Star Wives, Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America, Jewish War Veterans of the United States of America, Marine Corps League, Marine Corps Reserve Association, Military Officers Association of America, Military Order of the Purple Heart, National Association for Uniformed Services, National Guard Association of the United States, National Military Family Association, Naval Enlisted Reserve Association, Society of Medical Consultants to the Armed Forces, the Military Chaplains Association of the United States of America, the Retired Enlisted Association, United States Army Warrant Officers Association, United States Coast Guard Chief Petty Officers Association, Veterans of Foreign Wars of the United States, and Vietnam Veterans of America. This distinguished list of organizations consisting of members and former members of the United States military have registered their opposition. I can only hope at this point that members of the Senate will listen to this. This is a so-called savings of $6 billion out of an $80 billion package. Surely we can find $6 billion without putting an $80,000 penalty on the back of an E-7 retired enlisted person who's not rich, who served honorably under one set of rules, and who's been now told sorry. And I have to say this. When people see the government not keeping their promises, I think it's destructive to our system of government, and it's exactly the sort of thing we're seeing with Obamacare. I mean, it's not being overly repetitive to remind my colleagues that the President of the United States, Barack Obama, repeatedly, over and over, promised the American people that they could keep their insurance. For example, in his speech to the American Medical Association on June 15, 2009, President Obama stated, "No matter how we reform health care, we will keep this promise to the American people." Another promise. If you like your doctor, you'll be able to keep your doctor, period. If you like your health care plan, you'll be able to keep your health care plan, period. No one will take it away, no matter what. the words of the leader of the free world, Mr. President. And of course, we know from story after story of real people who are being hurt by this law that time after time after time again, in thousands of homes across the United States of America, that promise, just as the promise made to the servicemen, that promise is being broken. If my friend from Georgia will indulge me, let me give one example of a family of real individuals, honest, hardworking Americans who feel that another promise is being broken in the form of the so-called affordable health care. I got an email from a father in Greenville, Mississippi, who's concerned about his 27-year-old son. For the past 6 years, his son was covered under a policy provided by Humana. When the healthy 20-year-old first received coverage, the policy protected against major medical emergency, and the cost was only $70 a month. The President told the American public, if you like your health care plan, then you can keep your health care plan. According to this father in Greenville, Mississippi, this policy is no longer available, and the plan available for his son will now cost just under $350 per month, as opposed to $70 a month. A broken promise, Mr. President. The healthy 27-year-old who works in the automotive industry has been working since he was 20, and he now questions whether he can afford to insure himself at all because the cost has quadrupled. His discretionary income will now take a huge hit, just as the discretionary income of these retired heroes will take a huge hit. And the higher premiums will cause uncertainty in his family. I know my friend from Georgia may want to give some examples of some people in his home state who feel like, once again, in this instance also, a promise has been made, a very explicit promise, and in a very blatant way, that promise turned out not to be the case at all.
Senator from Georgia.
Mississippi, for giving me an opportunity to speak for just a minute about this, and I want to get to some anecdotes. But first of all, you know, it's been nearly 4 years since the Democrats in the Senate and the House forced the passage of the President's signature law, the Affordable Care Act, or what's commonly known as Obamacare. It's a title the President has embraced during the promising times and distanced himself from during the very difficult times that we're going through now. It's been kind of an interesting dynamic to watch. Instead of working in a bipartisan fashion to enact a health care law that would bring more competition into the private insurance market through market-based solutions, President Obama and the Democrats structured a deal behind closed doors right across this hall that we're looking at here on the west side of the Capitol. They structured that deal without any Republican input, giving the federal government more control over Americans' health care decisions. You and I were here on the floor when we fought both tooth and nail to stop the passage of Obamacare. On Christmas Eve 2009, we came to the floor of the United States Senate and voted against what I think is the worst piece of legislation that's passed in the United States Congress in the 19 years, Senator, that you and I have been here. I've been saying for years that Obamacare created more problems than it solved, and with the passage of every single day now, unfortunately, that is being shown as the painful truth. Although the White House has stood behind this terrible piece of legislation, some of my colleagues across the aisle have brought into question now the ability to stand, of it to stand on its own 2 feet, and who can blame them? I mean, this has gotten to be a major political issue, not just expensive, but it's a political issue. The law continues to be marked by red flags. We've heard few of the Democrats go as far as to say even that it is a train wreck, and they're exactly right. We've heard from the American people as well. They are rightfully upset that they have been repeatedly lied to and misled about this law by the President of the United States. The American people don't deserve a law filled with broken promises marked by disaster after disaster. The law is fundamentally broken, and Americans deserve better. You know, I noticed yesterday in a hearing, the Secretary of HHS reported that nearly 365,000 individuals have selected plans from the state and federal marketplaces, a number that's far below the administration's goal. I think their goal, the Senator may correct me, is 7 million by the end of March. I notice also that the state of Oregon has spent $300 million setting up their exchange, and as of this morning, there were 40 people, 40 citizens of Oregon had signed up. The fact of the matter is, this law just is not working. It's becoming more and more expensive every day. And just as we talked about in 2009 when we were debating this bill, it's going to be the largest mandatory expenditure that the United States taxpayer has ever seen. And you're right, I've got a whole book of anecdotes that I want to mention some of. First of all, Linda from Douglasville wrote to me about her drop coverage, in which she said, "We lost our gold plan. All of our costs will go up next year considerably. It is harder and harder for us to totally and really retire. My husband, who is 71, still has to work part-time to pay for our rising costs." Linda from Hampton, Georgia, also writes, "In 1997, I retired from Motorola, Inc., after having a career there for almost 30 years. One of my benefits as a retiree was a secondary insurance plan after Medicare that provided coverage for medical and prescriptions. My monthly premium for that coverage was $127 a month. Effective January 1, 2013, Motorola withdrew their insurance coverage for retirees and said that under Obamacare they simply could not afford it." So I could go on and on. I know the senator from Mississippi has some other anecdotes that he would like to mention, and I'll engage on some others on my side shortly.
Senator from Mississippi.
I thank my colleague from Georgia. Let me mention a husband and wife in Hernando, Mississippi. They're small business people. And as the chair is well aware, that's really how we create jobs in the United States of America. We love it when a big manufacturing plant moves in, but it's the small businesses throughout this great land that create the bulk of the jobs, and we appreciate it. Obamacare has hit the small businesses so hard and hurt their ability to create jobs. This particular small business couple in Hernando, Mississippi, tell me their private insurance plan that they have offered their employees in the past. It will not be grandfathered, and the new plan they are forced to offer their employees will have a 7% premium increase in 2014. That's real money. And a 66% premium increase in 2015, according to their insurance agent. Perhaps they believed the president when he said, if you like your plan, you get to keep your plan, period. Perhaps they believed members of the majority party, like the distinguished majority leader from Nevada, who said it not only means making sure you can keep your family's doctor or keep your health care plan if you like it, but also that you can afford to do it. Perhaps they believed that, but instead a 7% premium increase, hardly affordable at that, and then a 66% premium increase, which is really a blow. Their small group plan that they offer to their 8 employees currently costs $491 per month per employee. And by 2015, the plan will cost this small business couple over $800 per month per employee. These are real stories. These are real facts. It's going from $491 a month per employee to $800 a month to employee. I wonder how many jobs they'll be adding to that small business. And this plan doesn't include dental or vision. They pride themselves this small business couple on providing their employees quality, affordable health care that they help supplement. But with the frequent changes the President is making to the law, they are uncertain whether they will be able to cover the enormous cost. As small business owners, it's impossible for them to expand. They will not be able to hire additional employees with the uncertainty of the future. Let me mention one other example, and then perhaps Senator Chambliss can have a moment to speak on some Georgians. The next example is a family of 4 who live in Corinth, Mississippi, up in the northeast corner of our state. The full-time employed parents who currently do not have health care spent a month and a half trying to sign up for coverage for themselves and their 2 children. The least expensive plan they could have eventually find after spending countless hours trying to navigate the website will cost them just under $800 per month. For a working family in Mississippi with 2 young children to care for, this cost is an almost impossible burden on this family of 4. It may be, Senator Chambliss, that you have other examples that are similar to these.
Mr. President, Democrats
Senator from
promise
Georgia.
the American people, and I quote, affordable, quality health insurance coverage. The title of the law even centers on the word affordable. But I'm not sure how anybody can possibly argue that Obamacare is affordable when the letters I'm receiving from constituents over and over every single day, time and again, reference a significant increase in their total health care cost, and virtually 100% of the letters that we are getting indicate that not only are the monthly premiums going up, but the deductibles going up, their co-pays are going up, and it's simply going to be more out-of-pocket expense than either actively working individuals or retired individuals ever thought they would have to pay for health care. Tara from Columbus writes to explain what is happening to her children. She says, I carry medical insurance for my 2 adult children because they cannot afford it on their own. And let's remember, Obamacare covers children up to 26 years of age. Being one that has always had medical insurance and knowing the value of it if something bad happens, I have also made sure that they both had some type of coverage when they became adults. The sad part is I have gotten a letter on both, and now their insurance will be canceled because I, as their parent, can no longer afford to pay it for either one of them. We received a letter which shows where their old policy covers everything, and I mean everything. But because of Obamacare's requirements to carry everything, and a new policy will cost us twice as much each month. With me being unemployed and my husband the only one working, we have no choice but to drop their coverage. Winnell from Roswell, Georgia wrote, my private coverage was superb, but now my insurance premiums are going from $319 a month to $769 a month. And not only that, my copay is increasing from $5 to $20 for my primary care visits and $5 to $50 for specialist visits. I will be responsible for $500 per day out-of-pocket cost if I am hospitalized. Before, my hospital costs were included. And I will also have to pay for any tests. Before, all my tests were included. And apparently, subsidies do not apply to me. Loretta from Canton, Georgia writes, I received a letter from my insurance company dated September 25, 2013. I had until November 15 to choose to remain with my current coverage until December of 2014, the end of next year. My rate increased by 16%. According to the letter, the Affordable Care Act premium will increase by 139%. My former plan did not include maternity. I am 60 years old. I do not need maternity coverage. My new plan will include maternity, and my old plan was great for preventative care I paid nothing for immunizations, including tetanus and flu shots. I paid a $30 copay for a doctor visit. My prescriptions have been very reasonable. The new plan requires a network of doctors and hospitals. The premiums were between 150% and 200% above what I am paying now. I did not enroll, but have received numerous emails reminding me that I need to enroll. So far, I'm hoping that I can keep my premium at the 16% increase for at least the next year until the end of 2014. Otherwise, I will not have health insurance. I cannot afford the new premium. Kevin from Roswell, Georgia, wrote and said, "We are a family of 4. We have and want a catastrophic-only, high-deductible health plan with low monthly premiums and full coverage once we hit our deductible. We like our plan," very typical of a lot of families who were promised by the President, if you like your plan, you can keep it. We were paying $500 a month until July of this year. I had a bladder cancer in November of 2012, which was successfully removed, and I require no follow-up treatment, just biannual checkups, so I did expect an increase in my premium this year. In fact, our premium did go up to $560 a month in July. On November 1, I got the letter telling us that our premium was now going to $902 a month, a 60% increase. After 3 separate calls, I got the information that the $902 a month change was option B, which is an Obamacare-compliant plan which covers abortion, birth control, and maternity care. Since we could not have children, we adopted 2 kids, so that coverage is 100% completely unnecessary for my wife and me. Option A, we came to find out a few weeks later, was the option to keep our plan with an increase to $617 a month. This plan will be canceled on December 31, 2014, at which point we will be forced to get an Obamacare-compliant plan costing much more and covering things that we will never, ever need. Now, I'm sure the senator from Mississippi has received dozens and dozens and dozens of these letters, just like we have in my office, and knowing that the state of Mississippi has a lot of rural areas, just like my state does. In fact, I live in a rural area. There's also a huge discrepancy created by Obamacare between insurance premiums in rural America versus insurance premiums in more urban areas. Many of these premiums and deductibles are so high that it defeats the purpose of having health insurance. And this really does get close to home for me because I truly live in a rural part of our state. In 2 of the regions designated by Obamacare of southwest Georgia, there is only one insurer, one insurance company that's offering coverage. And the premiums in that corner of our state are much higher than in the rest of our state. It's the poorest part of our state. In Region 1, which includes Albany, Georgia, the least expensive silver plan for a 21-year-old healthy Georgian is $360 a month. That's the highest rate in the state. In Region 15, which is also in that part of our state, the same plan is $330 a month. Now, you have to remember, these are people who are paying $0 today because they aren't covered. And they're either going to have to pay a fine or they're going to have to take this coverage. In Metro Atlanta, the cheapest silver plan for a 21-year-old is $179.20 a month, matching the rate in regions in northeast as well as northwest Georgia, which are more populated. That's half the rate of an individual in southwest Georgia, where the income, average median income, is the lowest of any part of our state. So needless to say, households in rural southwest Georgia often do not have the same income as those in the northwest and northeast part of the state, but yet they're being stuck with the highest premiums. And I could go on and on about these anecdotes and about the serious economic consequences that Obamacare is going to cause on individuals in my state, but I want to turn back over to the senator from Mississippi for some additional comments.
Senator from Mississippi.
Indeed, this does hit rural America much harder, but it hits all Americans hard. I would ask the gentleman if we could speak as if in a colloquy, Mr. President.
Without objection.
I didn't hear any debate during 2009 in extensive hours that I stood on the floor and listened to the other side propose this. I didn't hear any debate explaining that in situations like in Georgia, folks in the metropolitan area would pay half the premium that folks down in rural southwest Georgia would pay. That was never something that the majority party in proposing this so-called Affordable Act said, now we're going to have to live with this, just want you to know that. It's a total surprise and one of the myriad unintended consequences of this unfortunate law. Did you hear any warning about that to the American people?
The senator's exactly right. Obviously, we both spent an awful lot of time on the floor of the Senate debating this. I mean, we were, as we talked about, we were here voting on Christmas Eve 2009 against this bill when it passed with 60 Democratic votes. No Republican in the United States Senate voted for the bill. No Republican in the U.S. House of Representatives voted for the bill. It passed with all Democratic votes. And if the senator will recall that famous quote by the then Speaker of the House, Speaker Nancy Pelosi, what we have to do is pass this bill and then we'll figure out what's in it. Well, guess what? What we are just talking about here is just one of the myriad of consequences that the American people are now finding out is in that bill. And they have every right in the world to chastise everybody that voted for that bill that didn't read it, because these are the real out-of-pocket consequences to hard-working, tax-paying Americans that were never talked about on the floor of this Senate or the floor of the House.
My friend from Georgia has, I think, very effectively gone chapter and verse on what this law is doing to families in Georgia, to small businesses in Georgia, to potential job creators in Georgia and all across the United States of America. You know, it's not just families and small businesses. Also, it's local governments. Now, the senator from Georgia and I came here after the 1994 elections on a promise, among other things, that we would fight against unintended consequences, against unfunded mandates on local governments. What we're finding out about Obamacare is that it is absolutely an unfunded mandate on, for example, small towns that make up the small counties that make up the bulk of the population in my state of Mississippi. Let me just give a couple of examples of what it's doing to municipal government. A city employee in Batesville, Mississippi, tells me he recently attended a meeting of city workers and their health care provider. They are told that their premiums will rise over 9% because of the President's health care law. This will be an increased cost of $55,000 to $60,000 that the city will have to cover to provide health care coverage for their employees. Now, presumably, they don't have a printing press in the back of City Hall. They're going to have to put an extra tax on the people of Batesville, Mississippi, to cover the additional unfunded mandate that the Affordable Care Act puts on the city of Batesville. I could also mention, and will also mention, at the other end of the state, on the Gulf Coast, the city of Ocean Springs, Mississippi, reported it will see a premium increase for their little budget of $47,000. to provide health care under the new improved Obamacare. This is a 13% increase because of the President's health care law. The city currently covers 100% of the employee premiums. The mayor of Ocean Springs, who I know happens to be a Democrat, said, and I quote, "We're going to have to find $47,000 from somewhere." Presumably, it will come from the taxpayers of Ocean Springs, Mississippi, and other small towns and rural counties around the state of Mississippi. You know, Mr. President, we're all human. I've made many mistakes during my life, and some of the mistakes I've made have been in my capacity as a legislator. I served in the state Senate for 7 years, been here in the House and Senate for some 19, along with my good friend from Georgia. I would hope that when I have seen mistakes that I've made legislatively, I've been willing to go back and revisit those decisions and say we're all human, we didn't get it right this time, and we ought to fix it. And that is one of the real disturbing things to me about this Obamacare law, because we see the rollout was disastrous. We see that the effect on towns, counties, families, and businesses is disastrous. And at the end of the day, we're still going to have over 30 million Americans uninsured, the same amount that we were targeting for coverage, supposedly, but with the passage of Obamacare. I would just hope that colleagues from both parties at this point would see where this has led us and agree there's a reason Congress meets every year. We can alleviate the problems that have arisen. We can correct the mistakes that have been made. And I appreciate people like our colleague from Montana, Senator Max Baucus, who at least said the law's implementation he saw was going to be a huge train wreck, noting small business have no idea what to do, what to expect. I at least appreciate that sort of candor from one of the architects of the Act. And it would seem to me that that being the case, it's incumbent on people who feel that way to say we need to revisit this. We need to pull this law out root and branch and replace it with something that cuts the cost of insurance, that slows the growth rate of health care expenditures, and uses market forces and competition, which we use in every aspect of our society except for health insurance. I appreciate our colleague from West Virginia, Senator Jay Rockefeller. He's retiring at the end of this Congress, but he said the health care law was beyond comprehension. I think we'd get over 60% of Americans agreeing with that. The law is beyond comprehension and the most complex piece of legislation ever passed by the United States Congress. I appreciate that sort of candor as compared to the position that, as far as I can tell, is still held by the majority leader, the gentleman who controls the flow of legislation in the floor of the Senate and who would have to be involved in bringing a corrective bill to the floor. Our majority leader said this earlier this year: this legislation is working, and it will be working better once we get the website up. Boy, how non-prophetic that was. People are benefiting, and then I love this quote. We may hear it again. Obamacare is wonderful for America, said the majority leader of the United States Senate, Senator Harry Reid of Nevada. Obamacare is wonderful for America. Get over it, unquote. And I would just hope that I would be willing, if I had made such an egregious mistake, to say we need to come back and revisit this issue for the benefit of American families, for the benefit of small businesses who want to create jobs, for the benefit of small cities who are having to increase their taxes and do without other services to cover this unfunded mandate. So I publicly implore my colleagues at this moment, Mr. President, to agree that this didn't work. I never thought it would work, but some people did. But it hasn't worked. And I think it is, I guess it's the reason we have elections every 2 years. But I would hope that even before the 2014 elections, that Republicans and Democrats could come together and say, we got this wrong, and we need to fix it, and we need to do it for the right reasons. We need to do it for the future of this country and for American families.
Now, the senator from Mississippi mentioned the way this came about and the comments of the majority leader that I can't really believe that he believed.